Lord, let us seek the truth, come whence it will, cost what it may. Amen. Transfiguration. This is not a word that we use every day. But spelled with a lowercase t, it's a word just like transform, transcend, transfer. It means to change something into something more beautiful and elevated. With a capital T, though, transfiguration becomes a proper noun, and there's only one. In the Christian faith, the transfiguration is one of 5 major milestones of Jesus' public ministry. And you know these: baptism, transfiguration, crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. The gospel scene today takes place about a week after Jesus had first discussed with the disciples about the suffering and the death and the resurrection. It did not go well. I mean, that's where Peter got really upset and started yelling at Jesus, and Jesus said to him, "Get thee behind me, Satan." It was pretty tense. But on this day, the foursome of Jesus, Peter, James, and John, are climbing a mountaintop. When they reach the peak, I can only imagine that the disciples were looking out at the beautiful valley, gazing down below. They were sleepy. And all of a sudden, the impossible happened. On this mountaintop, Jesus somehow suddenly began to change, and he appeared more beautiful and more elevated than he was before. I imagine his face shone like that of Moses in our first reading. One translation read that sunlight poured from Jesus' face and his clothes were filled with light. But if that wasn't enough, 2 bedrock ancestors of the Hebrew faith appeared alongside illuminated Jesus, Moses and Elijah. You know Moses from the law, the 10 commandments. Most of us, I think we know less about Elijah. I mean, we read the prophets all the time, but we usually remember the words of Isaiah, think more than any. I mean, think wonderful counselor, Prince of Peace. We know those words. But we recognize Elijah more by what he did, more by his actions. His story is embedded in the book of Kings. It takes place in about the 8th century BC in the northern kingdom. It's in the story of Ahab, where Elijah saves Israel, he saves the Hebrew people from worshiping the false god Baal. And then he saves them from a drought. And for this, he's considered a rescuer of the Hebrew people, an exemplar of the prophets. So there they are, these 3 giants of our faith, chatting. Well, Peter, James, and John just stood there, I'm sure, stunned at seeing Jesus lit all up like Christmas and 2 dead men in conversation with him. Okay, that had to be unbelievable. Well, we don't know the content of the conversation. Matthew 5, it says that he comes to fulfill the law and the prophets of the Old Testament. So in this moment, Moses is handing over responsibility for the law. Elijah is handing over responsibility for the prophets. And this is a transfiguration, a transfer of power all rolled into one. The law, the prophets, and the Messiah are all fulfilled in this moment in Jesus. And we've got 3 disciples who are witnesses. Peter, I love him. He just says whatever's on his mind. He is starstruck. I mean, Moses and Elijah are the rock stars of the year 33 AD. Imagine if right now, in this moment, all of a sudden, poof, there appear Elvis and John Lennon right here before you. Okay, we'd let them play, by the way, But Peter doesn't know what to say. So they're in the Feast of Booths, and he starts talking about, we'll build dwellings, and we'll build one for you and one for... And they're ignoring him. And then as quickly as it began, it ends. You've got a great fog that comes over them, and out of that fog comes the voice of God. This is my son. Listen to him. Those are words that Peter, James, and John needed to hear. Those are words we need to hear. We need to listen to what Jesus is telling us. There would be no tents and no tabernacle and no dwellings. They didn't even build an altar to mark the spot where the transfiguration occurred. And Jesus, we know from another text, said, "Get up and do not be afraid and do not talk about it yet." Okay, who would they tell? Who would they tell? Who would believe them? I mean, there's a reason I think that we are guarded when we ever might encounter a Bigfoot or a UFO or a ghost. It's best we usually just keep that stuff to ourselves if something like that happens. Otherwise, people think we're crazy. So here we are. What do? They go down the mountain and they go back to the business as usual. They find people and they heal them. They continue to teach. And what they do teach is that we all have the power of the mustard seed within us, potential and power to do good in the world. When we focus on Jesus, we have a new way of being in the world, to be leaders beyond the walls of this church. God is in the world, and God is in this church, and God is in every single one of your shining, smiling faces. Once we understand that God is with us and that we're not alone, we know that anything is possible with God. Once we are transformed by the love of God, we can't go back to the way things used to be. When we encounter Jesus, when we see Jesus in each other, we are changed. The church is not the building here. The church is all of us, you and me and all of us. And we have to remember that God is always calling us to be something more beautiful and more elevated than we were, to continue growing, to be the hands and feet and heart of Jesus in the world, to love and give grace and show mercy. And we just need to trust that God is going to give us the grace to do the work we've been given to do. And remember Jesus always told the apostles, get up and don't be afraid. Life gives us few certainties, but one of them is change. I mean, time may change me, but I can't change time. And time is something we have little of to make a difference in this world. We need to move forward confident that God is with us, and we need to be there for each other. We're a family. Even when we don't agree with each other, even when we don't think the same way, we are still called to see Christ in each other, to respect and uphold the dignity of every single person. I think we need especially to keep this in mind now, because I don't know about you, but I seem to get caught up every day now with the high-speed news and social media tidal waves that keep hitting us. As sisters and brothers, let's all try to run our words through 3 filters before we engage. Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it loving? Dana Perry is a writer from a website called Earth Stewards. It's people who are working for a more positive change in the world. And from the Essene Book of Days, Perry wrote on the fear of transition. I want to share this with you this morning. He wrote, "Sometimes I feel that my life is a series of trapeze swings. I'm either hanging on to a trapeze bar, swinging along, or for a few moments in my life, I'm hurtling across space between trapeze bars. Most of the time, I spend my life hanging on for dear life to my trapeze bar of the moment. It carries me along in a certain steady rate of swing, and I have the feeling that I'm in control of my life. I know most of the right questions and even some of the right answers, but once in a while, As I'm merrily, or sometimes not so merrily, swinging along, I look ahead of me into the distance, and what do I see? I see another trapeze bar swinging toward me. It's empty, and I know in that place that knows that this new trapeze bar has my name on it. It's my next step, my growth, my aliveness going to get me. In my heart of hearts, I know that for me to grow, I must release my grip on the present well-known bar and reach for the new one. Each time it happens to me, I pray that I won't have to grab the new one. But in my knowing place, I know that I must totally release my grasp on my old bar and for some moment in time hurtle across space before I can grab onto the new bar. Each time I am filled with terror. It doesn't matter that in all my previous hurdles across the void of unknowing, I've always made it. Each time I'm afraid I will miss, that I'll be crushed on the unseen rocks in the bottomless chasm below the bars. But I do it anyway. Perhaps this is the essence of what the mystics call the faith experience. Many in our community right now, I think, feel like they're hanging on for dear life, afraid they're going to miss the swinging bar towards them, or that no bar may come for them at all, that they'll be left hanging by a thread. I think the most difficult thing to do is to trust that God will be with you, to trust your community to be there for you, and to trust yourself and let go, and that you can catch whatever comes. Rapid changes are spreading across the country. Dealing with change is something that we do every day. But figuring out who we'll be and where we're going to fit in once the change comes, I think that's where our fear and our anxiety grow. Remember to take a breath. Take care of yourself. A couple weeks ago, a parishioner shared advice from their father. Their dad said to them, "You cannot panic and think at the same time. So breathe. Remember who you are. Remember whose you are, and reach for the next bar. Reach toward where God's will might take you next." We need to reach for that next trapeze bar in fear and in faith, being brave and tenacious, and just trusting God to guide us. Amen.